Hey, we're live. We're probably live for what, like 15 seconds while I was just sitting there doing nothing, but that's all right. We've got a weird show for you today on the MMA Prospectus
Is that
because,
new?
frankly, what?
Is a weird show really that new?
No, I know it's nothing new, but it's a little bit of a weird show because there's really like no fighting this week. Even I've tried to make this move to like a more expansive representation of uh, our scouting. I want to, dive in and look at who's fighting each week, not just in the UFC, but more generally, try to find a few young guys every week that look like they could put on a show.
How'd
This
that
is
go this
this
week, Zane?
what
How'd that go this week?
there's nothing there. Like Sherdog's Fight Finder has 6 cards globally listed for this fight this week in MMA around the world. 6 cards, and they only have info on like half of them.
For reference, it's usually like 20 cards on like a slow weekend.
Last week, which was a slow, or like the last 2 weeks, it's been like 60.
Yeah.
I've had to go through all these cards, look at all these fighters, and try to pick out, okay, who looks like they might be some fun to watch. And so we're definitely going to start out recapping UFC Brisbane, talk a bit about the guys that we talked about last week, if, who won, lost, all that. And then we've got a couple people to talk about this week, but this isn't going to be the deepest show of fighters to watch this week. There just was not a whole hell of a lot out there. Uh, on that note, I am joined by my constant companion, Tom Grant. Tom, thank you for being here.
That's no problem. You know, the prospect hunt never sleeps, even when there's no fights happening.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of decent prospects out there fighting this week, but just when I say a couple, I mean two. There are two. So if you're looking for young fighters to watch, you can watch those 2 guys, and everybody else just give a pass to. On that note, Brisbane, as prospect bereft as it largely was, gave 2 very compelling storylines I want to dive right into on 2 young fighters. They're the only fighters we really focused on from that card going in, and that is Jake Matthews and Antonio Carlos Jr. And one of them won, and one of them lost, and it is not at all who I would have expected going in.
Yeah, Jake Matthews really shone. And I think for one of the big things for him is just athletically, it really showed through what an amazing athlete this kid is. Just really, really, just amazing speed. Sorry, my cat is like attacking my computer. So if I just shake suddenly, we're not having an earthquake.
Does your cat have a good game? Is your cat a prospect? I mean, we can start talking about the cat if it's got a nice left hook.
She's got a decent guard game, but not much else.
Okay. Yeah. Well, guard game doesn't mean much.
No. She's very, very passive with it.
All right.
So, no, Jake Matthews for me, the performance, and I think you said it in pre-show, it's the best he's ever looked, just all around.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially what really stood out to me is that it's the best striking performance of his career. And that's really what you need to see out of him right now, because his ground game has always been solid. He's a great power top grappler, great ground and pound fighter, good, well-rounded game from the top. Not his bottom game is not that great, but the current metagame of MMA makes that a lot less important. But his striking game has been really wooden and one-dimensional and predictable. And in this fight, he just looked worlds and worlds better than he ever has before. And he made Johnny Case look really predictable, frankly. I mean, that was the big thing, is that Case kept coming in on straight lines, just straight ahead. He did an all right job changing speeds and things like that, but because he just kept coming straight at Matthews, he really gave Matthews every opportunity to make the best use of his athleticism. So, when somebody's coming at you straight on, that makes it a lot easier for you to step back or to time them coming in and to find them with the counter hook, find them with the body kick. And Matthews really dug to the body on Case a lot. And it really was a great opportunity for Matthews to look again like a guy who could be a future top 10, top 15 kind of fighter, even at a division as deep as lightweight.
Yeah, and coming in, he was the guy I was more interested in seeing get in there just because of the huge, like the jump in his competition, and to see if he would make that like big leap that you look for prospects to make, and I think he made it pretty unequivocally.
Yeah. And so the flip side of this is Antonio Carlos Jr., who fought Dan Kelly. And by all means, and by all odds, and by all reason, Antonio Carlos Jr. should have smashed Dan Kelly. Like, Dan Kelly isn't even that much more experienced of an MMA fighter than Antonio Carlos Jr. He's more experienced, but not way more experienced. He's relatively a newcomer to the sport. And he's 38, and Carlos Jr. is like 26, and Carlos Jr. is bigger, is a world champion black belt, grappler, and jiu-jitsu. And it was just primed for him to have a showcase fight, and he lost. And there's a lot to get out of that. It wasn't the prototypical prospect loss. I'll say that. It's not a bad loss or a terrible loss, but it was not the prototypical like submission loss or quick knockout or the kind of thing where you're like, oh well, he's still really good. He just got caught. It was definitely I hope he learns from this because he screwed up.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, and it seemed like he was doing pretty well early on. And the fight just kind of, as the fight went on, it just slipped away from him. And it's kind of what we talk about. Like, Daniel Kelly's just a tough dude. Just doesn't go away, doesn't give up, and is looking for any chance he has to win a fight. And man, does he look hard to choke.
Yeah, he doesn't have much of a neck at all. And it's not even like, oh, he's so muscular, he doesn't have much of a neck. He just doesn't have much of a neck. And he's got a huge jaw, so getting actually under his chin seems like it's probably kind of a challenge.
Yeah, no, and just in general, I mean, like we were talking about this earlier today because I forget what card we were watching. We watched
Akhmat it was out of Russia.
Yeah, and there was a Russian fighter on it whose entire strategy went in chokes, guillotines, triangles. I think he got put in both of those in this fight. Seemed to be pretty much like just hope he wasn't going to go out and wait for the guy's arms to get tired. And there's just some guys that are hard to choke. And actually, last night at Jiu-Jitsu, we had a guest brown belt in, and we were going over the rear naked choke. And we got on the subject of like people we knew who just were really, really difficult to actually finish a choke on, specifically like a rear naked choke where like they just don't have much of a neck. And then if they actually like flex their neck, it doesn't actually make the choke tighter. It actually puts pressure on your grip. And I think one I've always heard of is like Matt Hughes. Like Matt Hughes is one of those guys that was just like ridiculously hard to choke because of his lack of a neck and just how muscular his neck was.
Yeah.
And Daniel Kelly, for like how he looks in like comparison to other pro fighters, he doesn't look like an action figure when he gets in there. But I mean, you're talking about a longtime MMA veteran. He's been fighting. He's been fighting for 10 years.
Well, he took a fight like
he took
10
a
years
fight.
ago.
Yeah, no, you're right. But like also an accomplished judoka and a brown belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Like that dude's terrifying if you're in the gym and like he asks you to spar like in anything. If he asks you to roll, like that guy's terrifying. So I think it's one of those things that's easy to lose sight that like Dan Kelly is like one tough motherfucker. If just because he doesn't look like how some of the other fighters look.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we're seeing more and more is guys with a judo background or with I think of it too like a Greco-Roman background. They just end up being kind of monolithic in MMA. Like a lot of judo and Greco-Roman guys are just these incredibly hard to move, tough, strong fighters. They're not necessarily dynamic. I mean, nobody's going to look at I mean, Ronda Rousey being the high exception, but most other fighters of that ilk, nobody's gonna look at like Dan Henderson and be like, "Oh, he's so dynamic," you know. He's or Dan Kelly. He's not dynamic at all. But there was a point in that fight when Antonio Carlos Jr. shot in on him a couple of points, I think, for a takedown, and Dan Kelly just kind of leaned forward, and that was stuffing the takedown. Like that stuffed it.
Yeah, the thing about judo guys is that a lot of people talk about how the Olympic rules now you can't grab below the belt, you can't even grab legs, like they're not going to be able to defend a double leg, but it is impossible to like convey with words how difficult it is to move a high level judoka. I've actually trained with a 3-time Olympian judo guy, and he's a little bit older now, and doing stand up with that man, it feels like I put a gi around a tree and then I'm pulling on it in an attempt to get him to take a step. When you shoot takedowns on those guys and you shoot double legs, their hips are so strong that they don't need a big exaggerated sprawl unless you are physically on their level in terms of like strength, like core strength and arm strength to actually take them off balance enough to like make them worry about getting taken down.
Yeah, and early on, Carlos Jr. He was there. He was on that level, and he was able to get takedowns. But as the fight wore on, he got more predictable. It just didn't happen at all. So it is definitely it's one of those fights that, and I like using this as a comparison for I like using Jake Matthews and Antonio Carlos Jr. like seeing them right next to each other. One wins, one loses, because it's a great way to remember just how bad Jake Matthews looked against Akbar Areola for a round,
Mm-hmm.
and how badly and clearly he lost to James Vick before that.
Yeah.
And so seeing Antonio Carlos Jr. have this terrible fight, like you still have to remember, he did totally dominate Dan Kelly early on. Got like a 10-8 round off him in the first. And then he ran out of ideas. He's still a young fighter. He's still trying to figure things out. He did not have a good game plan. And he had a really bad stylistic matchup, which is somebody that is really hard to move off their feet, is really tough, and isn't going to go. And somebody who apparently, if you knee in the groin, will absolutely just pulverize your face for it.
I've always thought that's a really hard mental switch to flip. Like when you commit like a legitimate accidental foul in MMA and you stop and like, oh, I'm really sorry, I just kicked you in the balls, and then they restart the fight, and then you have to flip back into no, fuck this guy, I'm gonna punch him in the face as hard as I can. I feel like it takes a few moments for fighters to kind of get back in it mentally after that happens sometimes.
Well, certainly there's that feeling, especially. I mean, it's especially hard for kickers, because if you're kicking a guy low, and then you have to go right back to it and try and set it up again, then there's always that thought, like, oh shit, am I about to do this? Am I going to get it wrong again?
Yeah, and real quick, not to be not, I'm assuming it was on the broadcast that they said Antonio Carlos Jr. was a jiu-jitsu world champion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I thought he was too. Like I just thought that was like he was.
He is, but just for the clarification, he's a brown belt world champion, which like.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean he has medaled at world championships before, but like considering the small scope of the jiu-jitsu community, like he's a pro athlete, so like you kind of expect those guys to do pretty well even at the big tournaments.
Oh no, that's totally fair. Like I think I thought that he was a black belt world champ before the broadcast.
Oh,
Like
no.
my knowledge of that had nothing to do with the broadcast.
Okay, because I know I've made, and I didn't watch this one live, but I've like made it my mission to like whenever on the broadcast they say someone is jiu-jitsu world champion, to just like really quickly check it over, because I remember them like giving Kat Zingano that when she was like a white belt world champion.
Yeah, no, I know that I know they did mention it on the broadcast, but that's also my bad, because I thought I remembered him being a black belt world champ. But
If I'm he won a Pan Am's a couple years ago, so that's like
okay,
it's close. it's pretty much the same thing. Like it's not, especially back in like 2012, a lot of the same guys were showing up for it. So
I mean, he's. I think is it fair to say he was a reasonably competitive world class black belt?
yes, yeah. And I'm sorry about being pedantic about it.
No. That's totally fair. Like, it's just he is a guy who does have all of the correct athletic and size tools to go with his jiu-jitsu. Like he has
Oh yeah, like
all the right parts. It's just going to be like this was a test that he didn't pass, and it's too bad. And it's not the toughest test in the world. Like it was. It was weird that he didn't pass this test, and I think a lot of it had to do with just how hard Dan Kelly is to choke out.
yeah, yeah, man. We got a guy like that at our gym, just almost no neck, and he does get choked out occasionally, but it's always with a gi. Like forget no gi chokes on that dude because it's not happening. You got to have like that. The gi provides just like a little extra. You can get a couple more extra inches out of a choke. But no gi, man. When guys have thick necks, it's just tough.
Yeah, I have to assume that were Kelly an easier fighter to choke out, that Carlos Jr. would have ended that fight in the first round with a rear naked choke. Because he totally dominated it. But that's that's a lesson he's got to learn, because he had that fight. Like had he survived that third round, he would have won that fight. And so,
well, hopefully, Carlos Jr. Stays active and gets back in there because it's a guy that I really like watching him fight. But he's been for a young fighter, he's been surprisingly kind of inactive at times.
Yeah.
Like the 2 fights a year thing, you hope to see out of like a more experienced fighter who's like kind of found their groove.
It's the downside of getting to the UFC as young as he did, and as early in his career as he did. Like he got to the UFC after just 1 year. In his first year as a pro MMA fighter, he got to the UFC, and so like that's UFC is a really hard place to go up and to move up and to get experience.
Yeah, I mean, just ask Aljamain Sterling how tough it can be to get fights.
It can be tough to get fights, and it's also just the kind of thing where like even dudes like Dan Kelly, like Vitor Miranda, like Patrick Cummins and Kevin Casey and Eddie Gordon, that the dudes that Antonio Carlos Jr. has fought, all of them have excelled on the regional level.
Mm-hmm.
They were all really good. Some of the best fighters regionally outside the UFC. And when you're having to gain experience by only fighting guys who are like the top of the food chain on the regional level, that's a tough way to go. Most guys who come up through regional ranks over a long period of time do not do that at all.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see. And there's, like I say, the thing with it is, you look at that Matthews fight, and you should know that Antonio Carlos Jr. can absolutely make a huge jump the next time out. He's training an American top team. He's only 26. He's only been fighting for 2.5 years, just over 2.5 years. There's no reason to think that he won't make a huge jump for his next fight.
Yeah, no, I agree. He's still very much a guy to watch.
Isn't it weird that I just realized at one point Kenny Florian and Antonio Carlos Jr. have competed in the same weight division.
Huh.
Not at the same time, but Kenny Florian starting out his UFC career as a middleweight.
That was that was a weird, man. What a weird time.
Yeah.
And then
I just thought I'd throw that out there because it's kind of insane to consider a dude like that and a dude like Kenny Florian ever sharing any kind of the same weight class.
Yeah.
And mostly I said that because he looks like kind of an oversized Kenny Florian. Or as I believe Phil McKenzie put it, Jake Gyllenhaal if he became one of the monsters from Attack on Titan.
I like that. I think that fits.
It does. So, Brisbane was not kind to Carlos Jr. Was very kind to Jake Matthews. Otherwise, regionally, the one guy we really got excited about last week was Sebastian Kodwicka, a Polish prospect, and he immediately went out and lost, of course.
Naturally, it's just how it is.
Yeah, he lost to uh, Bartlomi Kopera, who I went and looked, and I can see why he lost. Kopera is a strong technical kickboxer, somebody who really puts his combinations together, has fast hands, is very accurate, and who's got a good sprawl behind him. And not to mention the fact that Kodwicka is trying to out wrestle dudes in a ring, which is terrible for wrestling.
Yeah, rings are pretty much the worst.
So the combination of it being in a ring, the combination of his opponent having a good sprawl and being a much sharper technical kickboxer made this a bad fight for Kodwicka. He got outworked for a decision loss, but I still am really excited about him going forward. He's a fantastic athlete and a fantastic wrestler, and he's a young prospect. He's got to grow. He's got stuff to learn. He's got to figure stuff out. He's got to figure out his striking game better. And if he's going to keep fighting in a ring, he's going to have to figure out how to wrestle continually in a ring against people who have good counter wrestling.
Yeah, no, and it's gave us just another fighter to keep an eye on too.
Yep, it does. Kopera does look like somebody he doesn't look like the best athlete in the world, but being a good striker with a good sprawl, that'll take you a long way.
Yep.
Also, Adriano Moraes won last week over in ONE FC with the submission. I hear he got rocked. I didn't actually see that fight. And Alex Lecco, who we talked about, Brazilian, won. Walter Gahadze fought again last week.
Yeah?
Yeah, and he won again. Can Crusher fought another Can. I'm interested to see how close he is to getting to the UFC, because he's got one of those records that is like super paper close to getting to the UFC, but might just get him to Bellator instead.
Yeah.
He's now 28. He is 15-0, and he's just he's still crushing cans. And apparently he's got a fight with Colin Fletcher lined up, and I bet if he wins that, he'll go to the UFC. Because the UFC, they usually like to see that one qualifying win. Can you beat this one guy that we want to, somebody that we used to have fighting for us? But I think Gahadze has also bailed on this fight or a similar one on multiple occasions.
I'm trying to remember. He was supposed to fight LeBout, wasn't he? And he bailed out of that. He's had a couple of fights that he's kind of stuck himself a little bit in this longer than needed regional stint. If I'm recalling correctly, mostly because he drops out of fights and isn't the easiest dude to work with by some accounts.
Yeah, that seems. I mean, like I say, I think what I hear from what I've heard from regional promoters is that they try to book him and then he backs out of fights, and it'll be. I think his goal is. I think his sights are very firmly set on the UFC. It seems like, but he's trying to kind of get in through the back door.
Yeah, and if you're the kind of dude that they can't, if you're backing out of the fights, I mean, if there's one thing that the UFC hates, it's having to rebook fights.
Well, and I don't think he would do it at the UFC level. I think it's just that kind of thing. Like we see out of guys who go through Gladiator Challenge or Explode in the US, and they'll fight 10 times there, win all 10 times, and then they'll fight once for RFA or once for Tachi Palace or something like that, and they'll get a surprise upset win there, and then they'll be in the UFC the next day.
Yeah.
And it's a path that some guys can take, especially when you've got that really shiny record like that 15-0 record. If you get one legit win that a guy like Colin Fletcher, that could be his ticket. So
yeah, that Bama 25 card he's on is shaping up to be a pretty good one. Tom Duquesnoy on top of it. Mike Grundy's going to be on there. Some other notables from the European scene. Should be a fun card.
Also from last week, a couple other Polish guys we took a look at: Roman Szymanski and Pavel Zilazowski. Both won. Both had good showings. Szymanski is a big. He's the wrestle blanket that we looked at. Be interested to see if if he ends up being somebody that ends up on a UFC card with that wrestle heavy style. He's certainly got the kind of style that would do well. That might do well in the U.S. Wrestling is becoming more and more not the golden ticket it used to be, but he looks like a great athlete. And also a couple other people I just took a look at when I was looking through last week to see. King of the Cage has a flyweight, Benito Lopez, who looks like he might be interesting. A tall, aggressive Muay Thai style, lanky flyweight kind of guy I think the UFC is going to like. And I also saw a woman named Bobby Joe Dalziel fought last week. Beat a former Invicta fighter, her second win over a former Invicta fighter. And she is like legit 6'1" and in shape, 155 pounds. And I don't know if she could actually make 135 with her height and her fitness.
But someone from Cyborg to fight.
Yeah, she could end up being somebody that Cyborg could fight. I don't know that she'd beat Cyborg or have a chance, but she's won both her fights by KO so far, and somebody to watch out for.
Yeah. It'd be nice to have like one other name in the women's 145 division, just like one.
Yeah. Otherwise, this week, like I said, there's almost nothing. The only two guys I saw worth looking at are over in Legacy FC, Matt Schnell from Caged, the reality show back in the day on MTV.
Yep.
He is slowly forming himself into a pretty decent flyweight fighter. And he's fighting. He was supposed to be booked against what's his name? Former UFC fighter Damasio Page.
Yeah.
But Page is apparently backed out, and so now Schnell is fighting Clayton Mai, who already beat him. But I think it's a fight Schnell could win, just because at the time he was a much worse fighter just a couple of years ago. He seems like he's growing a lot. And his game, like he looks like he's turning into a really decent range striker. So I'll be interested to see what he can do. He's fighting out of American Top Team these days.
Yeah, I think he's a solid athlete, good range striker, good wrestler, flowy grappler on the mat. Most of his wins are by submission, but so are most of his losses. So, oh no, he's only has one loss by submission. Sorry, I was misreading that.
One loss by submission, one loss by majority decision.
And the submission, the guillotine he ended up in was against the guy who specializes in the guillotine a bit, and is it was like the third or fourth look the guy got at it. So.
And it was also a version of Schnell that was a lot less comfortable maintaining range, and so ended up getting pushed around a lot. Like I saw his fight against Jonathan Martinez, where he got Schnell got caught with an illegal knee, and Martinez got DQ'd. But Schnell was doing pretty well for most of that fight, and in reality, his biggest problem right now is that he tends to want to wrestle too much. But I don't think that'll be a major problem against Mai. It's just it'll be interesting to see. He's a much better striker and a much better fighter than he was, growing well. So I'm interested in seeing him. And then the other guy is over in Jungle Fight, Henderson Ferreira.
Oh, go ahead.
He looks like a pretty quality brawler. Like not great, but he looks like the kind of Brazilian brawler that will be in the UFC at some point.
Yeah, he at first look is kind of your very prototypical Brazilian brawler. He's a good athlete. He's super aggressive. But
Hmm.
what stuck out to me is he has a really good sense of ground striking. When he gets guys hurt on the ground, he has a really good sense of how to pound in those coffin nails and strikes really well while transitioning on the ground, which is one of those skills that's like kind of sometimes marks better MMA ground fighters aside from your run of the mill MMA ground fighters. So he's guy definitely worth checking out.
And as for as much a crazy brawler as he is, he's also got pretty decent takedown defense. Like he knows
Mm-hmm.
the basics of how to get a shot stuffed and move off it and shuck somebody off his legs. And
Which is not an insignificant thing for a guy in the Brazilian scene.
yep. And it could make him, being a pretty decent athlete, being really aggressive, having all right takedown defense, being good at transition strikes and ground and pound. It's something to work with. Like, you don't have to be the cleanest technical striker in the world if you can do all that.
Yeah.
So, those are really the only guys worth watching this week at all that I can see so far. There might be some others. There might be other cards that go up. All the cards don't end up getting posted early in the week necessarily. So, I'll admit I'm not doing the deepest dive into regional MMA and trying to find any and everything. I'm just going with what's easy and out there and I know is supposed to happen. But I think that kind of wraps us up for this week, unless you have anything else you want to touch on.
Um. Well, since it's kind of a light fight week, I'd recommend that people head on over. Obviously, this is on Bloody Elbow. A former co-host of the show, Patrick Wyman, and Connor Rebush on their show, Heavy Hands, interviewed Brian Stan, and they talked a lot about Brian Stan's advice for young fighters, and they touched on training, they touched on management, and they touched on a lot of things that we kind of talk about here. And it was really interesting to hear a lot of the stuff we were talking about coming from a guy as in the business and has experience with Brian Stan, including one of the things that he came to a realization about, that's something that Zane, you've been preaching for quite a long time, is just how much toughness matters.
Mm-hmm.
And how much that's an X factor that really can't be accounted for, but must be accounted for in almost every fight. So it's an excellent interview. I recommend everyone head on over and listen to it, and listen to the show regularly because Pat and Connor are just smart dudes.
All right, well, plug aside, I think that's a wrap for us. Go listen to Heavy Hands. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find both of us over on Bloody Elbow periodically, me every day. Give this video a like, thumbs up, subscribe to MMANation.com, DOTCOM over on YouTube. That'll get you all the latest shows, videos, interviews, all that good stuff. And we'll be coming at you with more of our random shows for the next week because there's not another UFC event next week either. Hopefully there's a more active regional fight card scene next week, and we'll dive back into that and maybe try to find a good secondary topic to go back over. Maybe talk a little bit more about some of the regional MMA scenes out there in the world. Come back to that as a topic because it's been quite a while since we touched on it, and it's always a fun one. Thanks everyone for tuning in. See you next time.